Hi guys, Ride here, your Chief Espresso Officer, and today I'm going to talk about something that I'm very passionate about, that a lot of people joke about, and that is decaf coffee. Now, for ages, decaf has had a bad name, and there's a million jokes about decaf, one of the main ones being why. But I'm here to change your mind about decaf because there is a real problem that's happening all over the world now as we go through this global pandemic, and that is more and more people are drinking coffee. And because we're working from home a lot more, we're drinking more and more coffee at home later and later into the evening, and you might not want to be up too late by having a coffee last thing at night. So decaf fits a lot of purposes, and not only that, if you've got health problems, you might need to drink decaffeinated coffee because you enjoy the experience of drinking coffee, but you don't want to have the caffeine. So no more jokes about decaf coffee. I wanted to show you why decaf can actually be your go-to coffee any time of the day. So firstly, what is decaf coffee? For those of you who have never heard of this term before, decaf is short for decaffeinated coffee, which means you've got the coffee beans and you've taken out the caffeine component. So essentially you're getting the flavor of coffee without just that caffeine component. So all the jokes about decaf coffee, such as why bother, what's the point, any of those, you're just misinformed if you actually think that that is true, because caffeine is one complex chemical compound and there's about 1,500 in a single coffee bean. So, whilst you might not want caffeine because you've got heart problems, you may want all the other fantastic chemicals that are in coffee, and you might not want to stay up all night. So let's talk about some of the other benefits of decaf coffee. Now, in the past, decaf tasted pretty horrible, but I can tell you why in a second as to why it tasted horrible, because decaf on its own can be as delicious as my main blend, Il Caramello. Some of the obvious health benefits are heart palpitations or any heart arrhythmia. You obviously don't want caffeine to interrupt any of that, so decaf coffee fits there. All of the other benefits like rheumatism, Parkinsons, arthritis, those conditions can actually be helped by the other complex chemical compounds found in coffee. So even though you don't have the caffeine, you have all of those other benefits from the coffee itself. So that's why you bother, and that's why there is a point to decaf coffee. So let's talk a little bit about the history of decaffeinated process. Now, the first commercially successful process was called the Rheumatism process by Ludwig Rheumatism, a German coffee merchant who in 1903 invented the process because he believed that his father had died from drinking excessive amounts of coffee. So he created this way, which was a steamed process, still soaked in water, but he added a whole bunch of chemicals into it. It was very successful. However, we've now learned that process is carcinogenic, and hence we don't use it anymore. Now, there are 4 main methods of processing decaf coffee, and they all have one thing in common, and that's that they soak the beans prior to roasting in a vat of water. Now, we're going to talk about the first couple, direct and indirect, which use solvents. And most of those are things like main components found in nail polish and paint thinners. And although they're food safe, they aren't the sort of things that you want to be consuming, especially if you've got any sort of autoimmune disease or anything that might be reacting to those chemicals. So let's talk about the first method, which is direct. In the direct solvent process, the coffee beans are steamed for about 30 minutes prior to being soaked in the vat, and this helps open up all the pores so that they're more receptive to the solvents. So once they've steamed, they put them in a vat of the solvents, and these solvents can include methylene chloride, which is paint thinners, and ethyl acetate, which is nail polish remover. And they then soak in these chemicals for about 10 hours. Then they get rinsed, and the solvents are discarded. And then they get rinsed again just to get any of that residual solvents on there. This method is actually sometimes referred to as the natural decaffeination process, but don't be fooled because there's nothing natural about it. This is the most commonly used decaffeination process for coffee found in supermarkets. So if you're buying decaf from the supermarkets, understand what chemicals you're putting inside your body. So in the indirect process, the beans are almost boiled for about 10 hours, and that helps extract some of the caffeine and some of the flavors out of the beans into the water. And then the water is then separated into a separate tank where they're washed with solvents, and that helps bond the caffeine from the water into the solvents, and then they reintroduce the water, the original water, caffeine-free, back into the beans, the flavorless beans, to add some of that flavor back into the bean itself. And then they're dried and processed and exported. Okay, so let's talk about the next method, which is the CO2 method. Now, the CO2 process was invented by Kurt Sözel, and it uses compressed liquid carbon dioxide going into this vessel called an extraction vessel. And then, using massive amounts of atmospheric pressure, it actually compresses the coffee and squeezes out the caffeine molecules. So this is a more recent method, and it's actually one of the newest methods, but it does use up a whole bunch of carbon dioxide. However, it is in place of those solvents. So it's a lot better for your body. Now, here's something that you need to know. If you're asking yourself, well, the coffee that I buy doesn't tell me which process it's used to decaffeinate the coffee, then it's always using a solvent method in either the indirect or the direct process. So think about that. Okay, so now let's talk about the process that our coffee uses, and that is the Swiss water method or the Mexican mountain water wash method. And it's 100% organic. It's using 100% glacial water from Mexico's highest mountain, Pico de Orizaba, and it's not using any solvents at all. It's a very awesome process. Firstly, the coffee beans are soaked in a vat of water, this glacial water, and it's slowly turned around. Now the water is actually charged with caffeine molecules in it to help extract the caffeine molecules from inside the beans into the water. Then the water goes out into a separate tank and goes through a carbon filter where it's now extracting all of the caffeine molecules out of the water, because that water contains a lot of the flavors from the original bean. And then the final step of that process is that that water goes back into the vat with the beans and then soaks for another 20 hours, and that helps bring all those beautiful flavors back into the bean itself. So what you get at the end is this amazing coffee that tastes just like regular coffee, however, it doesn't have any of the caffeine in it. The original Swiss water process was invented in 1933. However, it wasn't commercially viable until 1988 when they set it up in Ontario, Canada. And now we are able to get it all around the world. And it's worth mentioning that this plant is the only place to produce 99.9% caffeine-free coffee. And it's the only place that's certified 100% organic method. Now you might be thinking, yes, it's organically washed, but what is the coffee grown in? Is it using pesticides or is it using fertilizers? Well, nowadays, specialty coffee is grown most of the time in the shade and using organic compounds, so they aren't using any fertilizers or pesticides. So the coffee itself, before it even gets to the plant, when it's grown in Mexico, is 100% organic then. And then it's used 100% organic processing to get it to you. So you'll always see on any coffee bag that uses the Swiss water method or the glacial washed method, which are pretty much the same thing, you'll always see the label will identify that. So don't be fooled by buying something that just says, oh, it's natural, because it probably isn't. So they're the 4 processes used to make decaffeinated coffee. Now you're probably asking, well, doesn't matter because I hate the taste of decaf. And maybe you've had it sometime in the past, or maybe you still have it occasionally, but you hate the coffee flavor. I'm here to tell you that it doesn't have to be that way. What can decaf be? It can be as astonishingly delicious as a regular coffee. The reason it tastes horrible isn't because of the coffee itself, it's usually because of the barista, the roasters, or one of the methods. So if you walk into a cafe and you ask for a decaf coffee and they pull out a 6-month-old container with ground up decaffeinated coffee in there and they start serving that to you, you can guarantee that that's going to taste horrible. What we do in our store, because we roast our own, is we always keep freshly roasted decaf beans on hand and we grind to order. That way, they're always guaranteed to have all the natural oils and organic acids that a regular coffee bean will have, but without the caffeine. So help me change the mindset on decaf coffee, because it isn't a joke. It's a real thing that people really need, and we need to make it as tasty as regular coffee. So if you're a cafe and you're thinking, well, maybe I'll give this whole decaf coffee bean a try, make sure you train your baristas to not disregard it. This is exactly the same as a regular coffee. You need to weigh it, you need to see the extraction, you need to taste it, you need to try it with milk and without milk, and you need to get it perfectly extracting so you're not over extracting or under extracting like you would any other coffee. And what I love about the change in the coffee culture and that helps decaf coffee is that we're now starting to see other varieties of decaf coffee. Not only have they discovered a coffee tree that is 99% decaf in its organic state without any processing, but we're starting to see other countries producing coffee and processing it in the decaf way, because you can have any coffee that's green processed with a Swiss water method. So if you want some from Colombia, we have ours from Mexico, you can get it from Kenya, you could even try one of those beautiful Ethiopian Guji coffees that I love as a decaf version of it, which is exciting for me because I will hopefully in the future be able to provide you guys with an entire range of single origin decaf coffees from all around the world that taste just as good as their counterparts. And with the amount of consumption of coffee increasing over the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see the coffee consumption jump up about 20 to 30%, but you're not restricted to those times that you need to drink coffee in order to go to sleep. You are now going to be able to buy your Ethiopian Guji coffee and its decaf counterpart and drink coffee all through the night, which I just love. So here's what I ask of you. Stop the stigma, stop making the bad jokes, stop living in the past, stop this whole death before decaf point of view. We need to stand together with all the people who have to drink decaf as people who are able to drink decaf and enjoy it, and create a new future of coffee, one where we all actually appreciate how great decaf coffee can be, and stand together and say no more jokes about decaf. And if you don't believe me, don't take my word for it, check out the hundreds of reviews that we've got online, and then make a decision yourself to give it a try, and prove me wrong if you dare. I'm Ride, Chief Espresso Officer. Enjoy your decaf.